Shalom and blessings, dear brothers, all the family of Yeshua. What we're going to study today is a very important prophetic message for the end of days. Take this message with fasting and prayer. I received this message in 2012. I was sent by the Father to a mountain retreat area for 7 months. I was 7 months fasting and praying, and on the 7th month, He gave me a very important prophetic work. He gave me a prophecy in the book of Isaiah chapter 19, Yeshayahu 19. Isaiah 19 is a harbinger. Before Babylon conquered the entire Middle East, before Babylon conquered Israel, Syria, the land of the Moabites and Ammonites, Lebanon, and defeated the ancient Egyptian empire, there was a harbinger. And the harbinger of the judgment to come was that the Nile River was going to dry up. The Nile River was the breadbasket of Egypt, and Egypt was the breadbasket of the entire Middle East. So when Father brings judgment, his judgments begin first of all with the staff of bread, which is the food supply and the economy. 26 centuries ago, the breadbasket of the world was the Nile River, and there was a drought before a world war broke out. And the financial capital was Tyrus, a city in the motherland of Lebanon that was also completely destroyed. So, after 7 months, Father guided me to Isaiah 19. I'm going to read from chapter 19, from verses 1 to verses 10. Isaiah 19 says, "The burden of Egypt. Behold, Adonai rides upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they shall fight each one against his brother, and every one against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst of them, and I will destroy the counsel of them. And they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to those who have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. And I shall deliver the Egyptians into the hand of a cruel ruler, and a fierce king shall rule over them, says Adonai, Adonai Sebaot. And the water shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dry up. And they shall turn to the rivers far away, and the brooks of the fens shall be empty and dry up. The reeds and rushes shall wither away, the vegetables by the brooks, by the mouth of the Nile, and everything sown by the Nile shall become dry, be driven away, and shall be no more. The fishers also shall lament, and all those who cast a hook into the river shall mourn, and they who spread nets upon the water shall languish. Moreover, those who work in fine flax, and those who weave networks, shall be confounded, and its foundations shall be crushed in pieces, all the wage workers shall be grieved in their soul." So Isaiah 19 gives us this harbinger. Before Babylon conquered Israel and defeated the Egyptian empire, as I said 26 centuries ago, there was a massive world war. And after this world war came a new world order, a new world system where Babylon was the head of this system, and the world was never the same again. So the harbinger is that the breadbasket of the ancient world was going to be affected. There was going to be a drought in the Nile River. The Nile River had a very prominent textile industry of linen and cotton, as Isaiah 19 says. It was the breadbasket of Egypt. They had many crops on the banks of the river. And when the drought came, there was a famine throughout the land of Egypt, and also there was a famine throughout the entire Middle East. When I was reading this prophecy of the harbinger of ancient Egypt, the Father spoke to me, and he told me that this prophecy didn't just talk about ancient Egypt, but also talk about the end of days Egypt. And he showed me that ancient Egypt was divided by the Nile River from north to south. 1/3 of the Egyptian territory was east of the Nile, and 2/3 of the Egyptian territory were west of the Nile. Towards the middle south of the Nile, there was this city called Memphis. It was one of the capitals of ancient Egypt, and they had a very prominent textile industry of cotton fields and flax fields, a very prominent fishing industry, as Isaiah 19 says, also very prominent paper industry. The papyrus was produced there to produce books in the entire Middle East. And they had also very prosperous agricultural industry. And all this was destroyed during this drought of Isaiah 19. So when Father was revealing me these facts of ancient Egypt, he spoke to me and he told me, I'm going to show you who is the end of days Egypt. And he showed me a map of United States. And he showed me ancient Egypt was divided by the Nile River. United States is divided by the Mississippi River. Ancient Egypt had 1/3 of the land east of the Nile and 2/3 west of the Nile. United States has 1/3 of the land east of the Mississippi and 2/3 west of the Mississippi. Towards the middle south of Egypt, they had a very important capital called Memphis that was a center of trade. Towards the middle south of the Mississippi, we have a city called Memphis, Tennessee. Interestingly, the Nile River went through 5 major Egyptian cities, which are the cities of Memphis, Thebes, Luxor, Alexandria, and the modern capital of Egypt, which is Cairo. Interestingly, the Mississippi River goes through Memphis, Tennessee, Luxora, Arkansas. The name Luxora comes from the name Luxor, an ancient Egyptian name. Also goes through Thebes, Illinois, which was an Egyptian name, an Egyptian city. Also goes through Cairo, Illinois. Interestingly, at the delta of the Nile River, there was this great city called Alexandria. Also, at the delta of the Mississippi, we have a city called Alexandria in the state of Louisiana. So when he showed me all these prophetical aspects of the river Mississippi and the Nile River, he showed me that the ancient Nile River was a center of witchcraft. They used to worship idols of fertility because of the prosperity along the Nile River. Interestingly, in modern Memphis, we also see it as a city of center of idolatry. There are many pagan statues and different idols from different civilizations, and there is a pyramid, a copy of an ancient Egyptian pyramid. As there were pyramids along the Nile, now we have this pyramid along the Mississippi. It's called the Memphis Arena. Interestingly, on the front of this pyramid in Memphis, there's a statue of Ramses II, that according to secular archaeology is the pharaoh that oppressed the children of Israel, as a prophetic symbol that as ancient Egypt at the beginning welcomed the Hebrew people, but at the end ended up oppressing them. So this nation is going in the same way. It began as a Christian believing nation, but in the end of days is turning to be a pharaonic nation. So when I was reading this prophecy of Isaiah 19, Father showed me that the drought in ancient Egypt took place when there was a tyrant ruling the land of Egypt. This tyrant is Pharaoh Apries. Pharaoh Apries was one of the last pharaohs who was ruling Egypt. Pharaoh Apries is the pharaoh that betrayed Israel. Ancient Egypt used to be the best friend of Israel, and Pharaoh Apries betrayed Israel. So the prophecies say that if you bless Abraham, you will be blessed, and if you cursed Abraham, you will be cursed. In consequence of this treason, when ancient Egypt betrayed Israel, and Israel went to fight the Babylonians and didn't receive any help from Egypt, Ezekiel 29, it says that Egypt is a staff of reed for the house of Israel. And when Israel tries to lean on this staff of reed breaks and splinters the hands of Israel. Therefore, the Father will judge Pharaoh and will judge Egypt. Interestingly, During the days of Pharaoh Prius, after he betrayed Israel, financial judgment came upon Egypt, and the kingdom became so unstable. So Pharaoh Prius needed to bring foreign armies, foreign mercenaries from other countries, from Greece, to quench the revolts and bring stability to his kingdom. Interestingly, sometime later, when the drought intensified across the Nile River, the economy was damaged and broken, and eventually a civil war broke out. So when I was reading this prophecy, Father showed me that as ancient Pharaoh Prius was the Pharaoh ruling ancient Egypt before Egypt was destroyed and before the Egyptian army was defeated by the Babylonian Empire. He showed me a picture of the modern ruler of America, who is ruling the country since 2009. And he showed me a picture of him, and he asked me a question, and he told me, where is his father coming from? And I said, well, his father is from Kenya. And then he showed me that the ancient people of Kenya were related to the ancient Nubians, and this is the people where the pharaohs came from. Interestingly, Pharaoh Prius was ruling the land of Egypt when the Nile River was drying up, and eventually a civil war broke out. Now, when I was giving this prophecy during 2012, this last ruler was in charge of America, whose father is from Kenya, and the Kenyans were related to the Nubians, and this is the civilization where the ancient pharaohs came from. Very interesting. Also, his father was Muslim and was from Kenya, so that means that he had blood from Ham, Ishmael, and Esau, historically three major enemies of Israel. Now, in 2012, I was giving this prophecy, and it is very interesting that during 2012 there was an historical drought in the Mississippi River. The Mississippi began to dry up as a harbinger of what is coming in the future, as a harbinger of the war and famine that is coming in the future. Interestingly, during this drought, the cotton fields and flax fields of Memphis, Tennessee were affected. Ancient Memphis was a center of trade. Modern Memphis is a center of trade. Ancient Memphis was the capital of the textile industry, the world producer of cotton and linen. Modern Memphis used to be the capital of the textile industry, used to be one of the most important centers for cotton and flax. Used to be the main textile industry of the country, producing cotton fibers and also linen fibers. Ancient Memphis used to be the capital of papyrus. They used to have a very strong paper industry. They used to produce the paper for the books. Modern Tennessee also has a very prominent paper industry. The Nile used to be the main fishing industry of Memphis, and it was a source of food for the Egyptian people. Well, the Mississippi used to have a very prominent fishing industry as well. Interestingly, the Nile used to be the breadbasket of Egypt, and Egypt was the breadbasket of the world before the judgment came. So now the Mississippi River is the breadbasket of America, and America is one of the main breadbaskets of the world. And as we see approach the judgment coming on the horizon, we see the harbingers of the judgment on the staff of bread and the economy as it happened in the ancient days. So during 2012, there was this huge drought in some places of the Mississippi. You could even swim across a mighty river. Nobody would imagine that you could possibly swim across this mighty river, but the drought was so severe that in some areas you could actually swim across, and the water levels were so low that some of the boats couldn't navigate all the way up to the state of Illinois. So during 2012, the banks of the river were dry sand and dry up, as Isaiah 19 says. Many of the vegetables of the crops by the banks of the river were destroyed, as Isaiah 19 said. Many of the linen fields and flax fields were destroyed, as Isaiah 19 said. The fishing industry was affected also, as Isaiah 19 said. So the prophecy says that when there was a drought in ancient Egypt, a civil war broke out because Pharaoh Prius, Egypt used to be the best friend of Israel, but as this Pharaoh betrayed Israel in the battle against the Babylonians, the judgment came upon Egypt. An economical judgment hit Egypt very hard, and this Pharaoh needed to bring foreign armies to quench the revolts. And eventually the civil war broke out when there was the drought in the Nile. In the same way, United States proclaims to be the best friend of Israel, but lately, in the end of days, has come a new leader, a Pharaoh, that doesn't recognize Joseph and has been the most anti-Israel leader in the history of America. Interestingly, as ancient Egypt betrayed Israel and suffered economical judgments, also America is becoming more and more friendly towards the enemies of Israel, and America is bringing economical judgment upon itself. Interestingly, on 2008, the year of the election, we see the stock market crashing 777 points. And in 2009, since this last Pharaoh took office, we have seen the biggest economical judgments on the history of this nation. After receiving this prophecy, Father showed me something very fascinating, a fascinating prophetical revelation. In 1492, it was the actual date of the Exodus. During 1492, there was an ancient pharaoh whose name was Thutmose. Thutmose was the son of Ahmose. Ahmose in Hebrew means the brother of Moses. We know when Moses was living in Egypt, he grew up as an Egyptian prince, and his half-brother Ahmose, that means brother of Moses, became the ruler of Egypt. Eventually Moses needed to flee into the wilderness because he stood up for righteousness. And Ahmose, which means brother of Moses, became a pharaoh. Many years later, when Moses came back to Egypt to redeem the children of Israel, Ahmose died. He was dead, but his son Thutmose was in charge of Egypt. Thutmose, when he saw that Moses wanted to take the children of Israel into the wilderness, he brought economical judgment on the Israelites. He told them to make bricks without a straw, so that they couldn't even dream with the redemption and with salvation. So this was a huge economical judgment for the children of Israel. Now, it is very interesting that in 1492 BC, according to archaeological evidence that is profound and accurate, this pharaoh, Thutmose, died. According to the book of the Psalms, Pharaoh sank into the ocean as he was chasing the Israelites when they were crossing the Red Sea. Interestingly, the book of Exodus says that the spirit of the destroyer came during the night of Passover to destroy all the firstborn of the land of Egypt. Interestingly, Thutmose had two wives, and he had a firstborn child with his first wife, and then he had a firstborn child with his second wife. Interestingly, archaeology proves with accuracy that not just Pharaoh Thutmose died on 1492 BC on that spring, but also his two children died on the very same season. The firstborn he had with his first wife and the firstborn that he had with his second wife. All of them on the same season. Interestingly, in 1492 BC, we had a lunar eclipse exactly on the night of Passover as the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt. So when Father showed me this profound revelation, he showed me from that moment on when ancient Pharaoh Thutmose asked the children of Israel to make bricks without a straw in 1492 BC. 3,500 years later, 3,500 is the half of 7,000. 7,000 is the prophetic week. From Adam to Messiah, we have 4,000 years. From Messiah's first coming to his second coming, we have another 2,000 years. We come to the year 6,000. And from the beginning of his millennial kingdom till the end, we have 1,000 years. So his millennial kingdom ends up in the year 7,000. And then Father says in Isaiah 66 that he will create new heavens and new earth. So all the prophetic week of creation is 7,000 years, as Father made everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So 3,500 years is the half of 7,000. And this number is found throughout the scriptures. It says that the woman goes into the wilderness for 3 years and a half. 3 years and a half is 3.5 years. It says that the two witnesses will prophesy for 3 years and a half. 3 years and a half is 3.5, the half of 7 years. And also it says that the Antichrist will rule the world for 3 years and a half. 3 years and a half is the half of 7 years. So from the time that Pharaoh Thutmose asked the children of Israel to make bricks without a straw, that's in 1492 BC with the lunar eclipse on Passover. 3,500 years later is 2008. During 2008, we see a fascinating phenomenon. This last ruler wins the elections. The stock market crashes 777 points in America. And since this last ruler took office during the first months, the stock markets begin to crash and lose many points and points and more points and more points. The price of fuel begins to increase, the price of living, and also the cost of food and all expenses begin to increase. So 3,500 years later, we have this end of days Pharaoh to the very date that ancient Pharaoh was asking the Israelites to make bricks without a straw. 3,500 years later, exactly on that moment, comes this end of days Pharaoh to bring economical judgment again on the children of Israel. After Father showed me this prophetic revelation, he showed me something fascinating. He showed me in 1493 BC we had lunar eclipses in Passover and Sukkot. That was 1 year before the Exodus. During 1492 BC we had a lunar eclipse on the feast of Passover, and the children of Israel came out of Egypt. Interestingly, in 1492 AD we have lunar eclipses during the feast of Passover and Tabernacles, and also during 1493 AD. And this is when the children of Israel came out of Spain. That was the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition, and the children of Israel needed to abandon Spain. Interestingly, in 1967 BC, we had blood moons, lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot, and that's when Abraham left ancient Babylon and went to the land of Aram. And during 1967 AD is when Israel captures Jerusalem. After 2,000 years of exile, Jerusalem is once more a Jewish city, the capital of Israel. And during that year we have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. So then Father guided me to the following prophecy, and he showed me that during 1775 BC is about the time when Joseph was born. During 1775 AD is about the time when the independence movement began in America. When before Isaac was born, Father spoke to Abraham and told him that his descendants were going to be like the stars of heaven. And he says that they were going to be sojourners in a land not theirs for 400 years. Interestingly, in the book of Exodus, it says that after 430 years, the children of Israel came out of Egypt. Now, when is the beginning of this period of 400 years? The answer is in the book of Exodus, chapter 6. In the book of Exodus, chapter 6, it says that the children of Israel, the total sojourning of the children of Israel was 430 years. Interestingly, it is very remarkable, very remarkable that when Isaac was born, Abraham and Isaac used to live in the land of Beersheba and the land of Hebron. 4,000 years ago, the land of Beersheba and the land of Hebron were part of the Egyptian Empire. So this count begins with the birth of Isaac. From the moment Isaac is born all the way to the Exodus, we have 430 years. Now, when Isaac is 60 years old, Jacob is born, and when Jacob is 130 years old, he descends into Egypt. From the moment that Jacob descends into Egypt with the brothers of Joseph, all the way to the Exodus, we only have 240 years left. So it's very interesting that in 1775 BC is about the time when Joseph is born, and when his brothers come down to Egypt to be with him, that's when Jacob was 130 years old. We are only 240 years from the Exodus. From the birth of Isaac to the Exodus, we have 430 years. In the same way, as Joseph was born in about 1775 BC, during 1775 AD, that's the time of America's independence movement, and many of the Hebrews begin to emigrate to America. 240 years later is going to be 2015. During 2015, we're going to have lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot, but not this year only, but also during 2014. So we're going to have a tetrad, 4 lunar eclipses or blood moons during the feast of Passover and Sukkot. Every time in history we had a tetrad, 4 lunar eclipses in a straight line during 2 years, in a straight line. And when these eclipses happened during the Jewish feast of Passover and Sukkot, we had an Exodus. It happened in 1493 and 1492 BC, all these eclipses. It happened in 1492 and 1493 AD, all these eclipses, and Israel came out of Spain. Also, it happened in 1949 and 1950. We had 4 lunar eclipses in a straight line during Passover and Sukkot, and the children of Israel came out of Europe. Some went to Israel, some went to America. This is the date when Israel became an independent nation after 2,000 years of exile. Very interesting. Now, during 2014 and 15, we're going to have the same blood moons, and this will be the final exodus of his people. So, the exodus of which land? And Father showed me that this will be the final exodus of the north, prophesied in Jeremiah 6. And to be more specific, the final exodus of America and Israel. Why? Father showed me that this nation is not just fulfilling the prophecies of ancient Egypt, but is also fulfilling the prophecies of the end of days Babylon. Let us go to Jeremiah 50 and 51. In Jeremiah 50 and 51, he talks about the destruction of Babylon. Also, Revelation 18 talks about the destruction of Babylon, which is the end of days Babylon. Jeremiah 50, it says, verses 8, it says, "Flee from the midst of Babylon and come out of the land of the Chaldeans, and be as rams before the flocks. For I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon a company of great nations from the north." Jeremiah 50:37 says, "A sword is upon their horses, and upon their chariots, and upon all the mingled peoples that are in the midst of her, and they shall become as women. A sword is upon her treasures, and they shall be robbed. A drought is upon her waters." Now Jeremiah 51 keeps with the warning, 51:6, and repeats again, "Flee out of the midst of Babylon, and let every man save his life." 51:7, "Babylon has been a golden cup in the hands of Adonai, which made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunk of her wine. That's why the nations went mad. Babylon shall suddenly fall and be destroyed. Lament for her." Now Jeremiah 51:13 says, "O you who dwell upon many waters, abounding in treasures, your end has come, the measure of your greedy gain." 51:37, "Babylon shall become a heap, a dwelling place for jackals, astonishment and a hissing without inhabitant." 51:41, it says, "Oh, how Sheshach has been captured, and how the praise of the whole earth has been destroyed." 51:43, "Her cities have become a ruin, dry land and a wilderness, a land which no man dwells in, neither the son of Adam passes by." 51:45, "My people, go out of the middle of her, and let every man deliver his life from the burning displeasure of Adonai." So now, let us go to Revelation 18, and it's going to clarify to us who is this end of days Babylon. Revelation 18 talks about the destruction of Babylon. Revelation 17:5, it says that the capital of Babylon is this great city that is called Mystery of Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the earth. In Revelation 18, it says, 18:2, it says, "Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become a habitation of demons." Revelation 18:4, it says, "Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins." Another warning to escape this nation. 18:7, it says that this is the capital of Babylon, is a great city that will be destroyed together with the entire land of Babylon. And it says, "As much as she has glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her, because she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. Therefore her plague shall come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, because Adonai Elohim, who judges her, is mighty." In Revelation 18:12 is going to give us the clue of the capital of Babylon. It says that this city has merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all citron wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spices and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and carriages and chariots and slaves and souls of men. And then it says in Revelation 18:16, it says, "Cry out and say, woe, woe, the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such great wealth has been desolate, and every ship master and every passenger and sailors, and as many as gained their living by the sea stood afar off, and cry out when they look on the smoke of her burning, saying, was there ever a city like this great city? And they cast dust on their heads, and cry, weeping and wailing, saying, woe, woe, the great city, in which all who had ships on the sea became rich by reason of her wealth. For in 1 hour she has been desolate." So here the merchants of the earth lament the destruction of Babylon. When I was given this prophecy, Father showed me that this nation is not just fulfilling ancient Egypt, but also is fulfilling the prophecies of Babylon. There is now in the end of days only one nation that can fulfill all the prophecies of Babylon. Babylon needs to be the most powerful nation in the world, with the biggest concentration of gold and silver, money and trade, with the biggest concentration of Jewish people. That's why Father cries out, "Come out of her, my people, come out of her, my people, come out of her, my people." Babylon has a capital city that is called the Great City by the Waters, the Great Harlot, and that's where the nations meet, and this is the richest city on earth. There is only one place that can fulfill this prophecy, and this nation of Babylon is America. And this great city, which is Babylon the Great, is New York City. It says in Revelation 17 that Babylon is the great harlot by the waters. In New York City we have the Statue of Liberty, the great woman by the waters. Interestingly, this statue was shaped and designed in the same form of an ancient Babylonian statue that the ancient Babylonians used to worship, and they called this idol the great harlot. This ancient Babylonian idol used to have a crown of 7 spikes. The Statue of Liberty has a crown of 7 spikes. The prophecies say that Babylon was a golden cup in the hands of Adonai. The Statue of Liberty has a golden torch. Babylon has a big concentration of Jewish people. That's why the word says, "Come out of her, my people." Prophecy is always around his people, the children of Israel. Interestingly, New York has the biggest concentration of Jewish people on earth. Ancient Babylon was the richest city on earth, and Revelation 18, once ancient Babylon was destroyed, talks about an end of days Babylon that will be the center of trade. Well, 40% of international trade is linked to New York. Revelation 18 says that the end of days Babylon will have the biggest concentration of trade, gold and silver. Interestingly, in the reserves of the federal banks in New York, we have the biggest concentration of silver and gold in the world. We also have the biggest concentration of capital, and New York by far is the richest city on earth, surpassing Tokyo, Los Angeles, Chicago, and any other city you can imagine in the world. It says that Babylon was a mixture of different peoples. On New York, we find every single nationality on earth. It says that Babylon is where the nations meet. In New York, we find the headquarters of the United Nations. That's where the nations meet. It says that when this city falls, all the merchants of the world will lament the fall of Babylon. Well, there is only one city that, if this city falls, will bring the entire financial system down, and this city is New York. If New York collapses, the dollar will collapse. If the dollar collapses, the world trade is gone. If New York collapses, 40% of the world trade is gone within seconds, since 40% of the world trade is linked to New York City. So the prophecy talks about the escape from New York, and this place will be destroyed. So now the answer is when. And when I asked this question, Father showed me a mystery contained in the sabbatical years. In Leviticus 25, it says that every 7 years is a SHMITAH year. A SHMITAH year means a year of release. He told us that we need to let the land rest. We are not allowed to plant anything. We need to let the workers go free with their due payment. And all the food that grows by itself is food for us, and to give to the strangers and to the pilgrim. As Father gave us 6 days to work, he gave us the 7th day to rest and worship him and study his book. Also, as he gave us 7 months to work, as he gave us 6 months to work, on the 7th month, it was considered a sabbatical month for the ancient Hebrews. They used to make the ancient pilgrimage to Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement and Feast of Tabernacles. In the same way, we have 6 years to work, but on the 7th year is a sabbatical year. And during these sabbatical years, the most fascinating events throughout history have happened. If we begin with Genesis, going all the way back to Adam, The first sabbatical year would have been the year 7. The next sabbatical year would have been the year 14. The following, the year 21, 28, 35, and so on. Interestingly, in the book of Genesis, we find the genealogy. Adam was created, and then he lived 930 years. When he was 130, his son Seth was born. So Seth was born in the year 130 and died in the year 1042. Then Enosh was born in the year 235 and died in the year 1140. If we keep going down the line, we find that Enoch, in Hebrew is Hanoch, he was born in the year 622, beginning with Adam, and he lived 365 years old. So he was taken up into heaven on the year 987. If you get a calculator and you add 7 plus 7, plus 7, plus 7, plus 7, plus 7, you will eventually find out that the year 987 is a sabbatical year. This is a Shemitah year, when Enoch, being the 7th generation on the 7th year, ascended to heaven, as a prophetic symbol and sign that by the 7th millennium, the bride of Yeshua will ascend to heaven and not see death. If we keep going down the line in this unbroken chain of sevens, we will find the most fascinating phenomena in the history of Israel. We will find out that the Exodus took place on a sabbatical year. King David was born in a sabbatical year, lived 70 years, and died on a sabbatical year. When ancient Israel did what was right, ancient Israel enjoyed a great blessing. When ancient Israel was keeping the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. But when Israel failed to keep the Shemitah year which means release, it came back as a release of judgment. It says in the prophets that because Israel failed to keep the sabbatical year, Israel went into exile for 70 years, which are 10 sabbatical years, 7 by 10. Interestingly, also Peleg was born, the son of Eber, on the year 1757 from Adam, 1757 in the Hebrew calendar. This year was a sabbatical year, and the book of Genesis chapter 11 says that on the very same year is when Nimrod wanted to finish a tower that would reach heaven to conquer heavens and earth. So as he was trying to finish this tower, the judgment came and confusion came, and people were divided by languages. People couldn't understand each other, and Eber named his son Peleg with this name. Peleg means division, because that's when the earth was divided. And Peleg was born in the year 1757, which was the Shemitah year. Now, later on throughout history, we see now the Shemitah coming back as a release. The Shemitah now, years later, is coming back as a release. We see in 2 Kings 18:9. On 2 Kings 18:9 is when Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, comes to fight against Judah. This was the secular year about 708 BC. Also in 2 Kings 18:13, when the king of Assyria came to invade Judah, the prophet Isaiah told the king that he was going to have a sign of victory. And the sign of victory, he says, this year you eat what it grows from itself, and the next year what it springs from the ground, and on the third year you will sow and reap. This is a clear sign of the sabbatical year, because on the sabbatical year you were not going to have food for 2 years. Why? Because on the 6th year, Father was meant to bless you, so you would have food for the 6th year, the 7th, and the 8th. And on the 9th year, you will begin your normal archaeological cycle. Eventually, the tribes of Israel, in 2 Kings 18:10, on the 6th year of Hezekiah, is when Shomron was captured and exiled. According to archaeology, this was the year 715. If we keep counting in an unbroken chain of sevens from 715, the following Shemitah is 708 BC, then 701 BC. If we keep going in this unbroken chain of sevens, we will find the most fascinating events happening always on the Shemitah. For example, the year 69 AD of the secular calendar was a Shemitah. That's when the Romans set Jerusalem on fire. The year 321 was a Shemitah when Constantine issued the Sunday laws, and he changed the Sabbath for Sunday and Passover for pagan feasts like Easter. Also tabernacles for Christmas. As we approach modern history, the beginning of the 1700s was a Shemitah year, the year 1700. That's the beginning of the Great War in Northern Europe that lasted 21 years and ended in 1721. 1721 is another Shemitah, when Europe was devastated and many pilgrims began to come to America. During 1714, another Shemitah, we have the war between Turkey and the Kingdom of Venice. Later on, during 1756 is another Shemitah, we had the 7-year war in Europe. Few Shemitahs later, during 1791, we had a very interesting Shemitah when Washington, D.C. was built, was founded as a city, and that year we had lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. 7 years later, the following Shemitah, we have the French Revolution. Interestingly, 2 Shemitahs later, in 1812, we have the invasion of Russia by the Napoleonic armies, and there was a war in America against the United Kingdom. 2 Shemitahs later, we had the war between Persia and Russia. 2 Shemitahs later, in 1833, we had the first revolution in Spain. Few Shemitahs later, on 1861, we have the American Civil War. 7 years later, on 1868, we have another revolution in Spain. Few Shemitahs later, on 1896, we have a revolution in the Philippines. 2 Shemitahs later, on 1910, is the Mexican Revolution. 7 years later, here it gets very interesting when we come closer and closer to the end. During 1917, it was an Shemitah sabbatical year. The world was wicked, and the Shemitah comes as a release of judgment, but also a release of prophecy and a release of anointing for those that truly belong to the Father. During 1917, this was a Shemitah. 1917 was the middle of First World War, when the British armies captured Jerusalem and took Jerusalem away from the hands of the Muslim world after 12 centuries of Muslim occupation. During 1917, there is a revolution in Russia, and many of the Jews, many of the Hebrews begin to escape Russia. At the same time, England proclaimed the Balfour Declaration, declaring and stipulating in this declaration that the Jewish people can come and dwell in the Promised Land after almost 2,000 years of exile. 7 years later, in 1924, we see economical havoc worldwide, and there is a revolution in Russia. Much more Hebrews, many more escape Russia and go to Israel and begin to establish the first kibbutz, the first settlements. 7 years later, in 1931, when America finished the Empire State Building as a symbol of pride and prosperity, and every time humanity built a high tower like the Tower of Babel during the year 1757 of the Hebrew calendar, as there was judgment back then on 1931, there was huge economical judgment, not just in America but worldwide. There were many natural disasters, not just in America but worldwide. America was destroyed by the Dust Bowl. There was famine throughout the land. China was devastated by the famous Chinese floods, where almost 5 million people died and 23 million people were displaced. This was the very same year when China became communist republic. and began oppressing the Christian brothers. So the SHMITAH came to China as a judgment for persecuting believers. 7 years later, 1938, is the beginning of the Jewish persecution in Germany. The Germans gathered a bunch of bricks and began slamming all the windows of Jewish businesses in Germany. Many Jews were murdered and beaten. Many were thrown in concentration camps during 1938. That was the Night of the Crystals, also known as Kristallnacht. Interestingly, as many Jews tried to escape Germany and come to New York, some were denied an entry visa in the port of New York. So the SHMITAH came also as a release of judgment to America. And during 1938, there was a very powerful hurricane hitting Long Island, New York. Also, there was the Yellow River flooding China, and almost 1 million people died. 7 years later, as Germany rose in pride against the people of the Father, and the scripture said, I'm going to bless those that bless Abraham and curse those that cursed Abraham. As Germany oppressed the children of Israel in 1938, 7 years later, Germany was completely destroyed. Berlin was bombed. Every single German city was completely destroyed by the Allies. That was the end of Second World War, with the defeat of Germany, with the nuclear bombing of Japan. And interestingly, on that year, we saw the creation of the United Nations, the World Bank, and the IMF. 3 major institutions designed to make the world one for the time of the Antichrist. Interestingly, during 1945, thousands of Jews left Europe and went to Israel, others to North or South America. 7 years later, during 1952, we had torrential rains in England, and that's many natural disasters worldwide, nuclear detonations in Nevada, and that's the beginning of the European community, the resurrection of the Roman Empire. 7 years later, 1959, we have a revolution in Cuba. Vietnam invaded Laos. Tibet is invaded by China. There is a great Chinese famine, killing over 15 million people. Again, China is persecuting the Christians, and now the SHMITAH comes as a release of judgment. Also, on the last day of Feast of Tabernacles came a terrible typhoon hitting Japan, where about 5,000 people died and 1.5 million remain homeless. Also, during 1959 was the beginning of the spatial race. People began to send satellites to space, and we began to have telecommunications. Interestingly, the prophet Daniel says that in the end of days, knowledge was going to increase. 7 years later, during 1966, we had natural disasters worldwide, especially apocalyptic floods in Finland. There was the Vietnam War. There were also racial wars in the United States. There was a point of tension in the Cold War. There was martial law in Argentina. France began to detonate the first bombs in the Pacific. And there was a bloody cultural revolution in China. There were many quakes in Turkey, and there was the war between Israel and Syria. There were many quakes in Peru, and strong Christian persecutions in China. Also many floods in Italy. And that was the beginning of the construction of the World Trade Center. 7 years later, as the first tower of the World Trade Center is finished, we have economical judgment, not just in America, but worldwide. President Nixon was forcing Israel to give the land away, and he was cursing the Jewish people as he was released in the secret tapes of the Watergate scandal. The prophecies, especially in Prophet Joel, it says, I'm going to call to judgment the nations that divide my land. So in 1973, as President Nixon was trying to divide Israel, America was judged by the Father, and came a big oil embargo and economical crisis. Israel was judged as well for compromising the land, and also suffered the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Also, there was martial law in Chile, and big floods, apocalyptic floods in Spain. There was a famine, historical famine in Ethiopia, and there was also the famous London flu. 7 years later, America didn't learn the lesson and the secret mystery of the SHMITAHs. So during the SHMITAH of 1980, President Carter is forcing Israel to give the land away. On the spring of 1980, the price of silver and gold collapsed in America. America is hit with a big oil crisis. And in the same year, the volcano St. Helens erupted in Washington, D.C., covering several states in ash. That was also the year when the fascist regimes began to take over South America. There were many quakes in Italy, and there was civil war in Salvador and Peru, and that was the beginning of the war between Iraq and Iran. Also, there was a heat wave throughout the entire United States. 7 years later, the world and America have not learned the mystery of the SHMITAHs. During 1987, President Reagan again is trying to divide the land of Israel and is forcing Israel to make covenants with the Arab world that are not beneficial to Israel. So during the fall of 1987, we see the biggest crash in modern history of the United States. The Dow Jones goes down 500 points. The stock market lost 22% of its value. There is crisis in America and worldwide. Also, Israel was judged. That was the year of the first Intifada. Intifada means a series of terrorist attacks against Israel. 7 years later, America has not learned the mystery of the SHMITAHs. During 1994, President Clinton tries to divide, no matter what, the land of Israel. During a very specific meeting, when he is forcing Israel to give away 30% of its territory, President Clinton receives a phone call and somebody tells him or asks him, who is Monica Lewinsky? After President Clinton is disgraced before the entire nation, he needs to disregard the case of Israel and he needs to focus on cleaning his name. At the beginning of 1994, when President Clinton was pushing Israel against the strings to divide the land, there was a terrible earthquake in Los Angeles, causing $30 billion in damages. Also, during the spring of that year, the Nasdaq lost dozens and dozens of points. There was economical havoc. During that year also, the Mexican economy completely collapsed. And that was also a year of judgment for many countries in South America. During that very year, there was a storm Alberto that destroyed 18,000 homes in the United States, and Hurricane Gordon also caused several hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. During Palm Sunday, again, as America was trying to divide Israel, there was a huge tornado outbreak throughout the United States, and there were apocalyptic floods taking place in Russia. 7 years later, neither America nor the world have learned the mystery of the Shemitah. During September 2001, President Bush is trying to divide Israel and create a Palestinian state, not understanding Prophet Joel that says, I'm going to judge the nations that divide my land. Within 1 week, on September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers fall, and with that, the global economy begins to collapse. 7 years later, the world has not learned the lesson of the Shemitah years. During 2008, as President Bush was trying to divide Israel, and he wanted that year to be the year of the Palestinian flag. On the eve of Feast of Trumpets, 2008, we had the biggest market crash in American history. The Dow Jones crashed and went down 777 points. Interestingly, going back 7 years, during 2001, America had a year of visitation. The Twin Towers collapsed. But there were two politicians that, following the terrorist attack of 9/11, prophesied before the entire Congress, and they said, there is one verse in the Bible that will help us go through this moment. The bricks have fallen, but we're going to rebuild with hewstones. The sycamore trees are cut down, but we are going to replace them with cedars. Not understanding that this prophecy of Isaiah 9:10 is not a prophecy of blessing, but it's a prophecy of doom and destruction. Ancient Israel, there was a nation dedicated to the Father and promised to keep His commandments. When Israel went astray and became became a nation of witchcraft and idolatry and fornication and murder. Before its destruction, Father allowed the Assyrian Empire to destroy several cities in the north of Israel. So in Isaiah 9:10, the inhabitants of Israel, the Ephraimites, instead of saying, "Let us repent with sackcloth and ashes and seek the Father and keep his commandments," they said, "The bricks have fallen, but we are going to rebuild with hewnstones. The sycamore trees are cut down, but we are going to replace them with cedars." Interestingly, 14 years later, which is 2 Shmitahs later, during 715 BC, the Shemitah came back as a judgment as Israel didn't repent, and the 10 tribes of Israel were completely wiped out. During 2001, during 9/11, 2 senators, John Edwards and Tom Daschle, prophesied, "The bricks have fallen, but we are going to rebuild with hewnstones." Interestingly, short after that, both of them fell in disgrace. One was found in a sexual scandal and the other one in a tax scam, and they were banished from the White House. The third one that proclaimed, "We're going to rebuild and emerge stronger than before," is the current leader of this nation. Interestingly, ancient Israel, when proclaiming the vow of defiance, "The bricks have fallen, but we're going to rebuild with hewnstones. The sycamore trees are cut down, but we're going to replace them with cedars." As ancient Israel was building bigger towers and houses, 14 years later, which is 2 Shmitahs after this proclamation, ancient Israel was completely destroyed. 14 years later, after 2001, is going to be 2015. During 2015 is not just a Shemitah of judgment fulfilling the prophecy of the 14 years, but also it's a Shemitah with blood moons, lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot, a very unique event in history that won't happen again and has not happened like this in many centuries. To have a Shemitah together with a tetrad, 4 blood moons in a straight line. Interestingly, after 9/11, little did they know, these politicians, that when the Twin Towers collapsed, there was a sycamore tree on ground zero. And as a piece of steel was collapsing from one of the towers, it hit a sycamore tree on ground zero and destroyed it in pieces. Later on, there was a ceremony in New York on ground zero, and they pick up this fallen sycamore tree and replace it with a cedar tree, exactly as the prophecy says. When the Twin Towers collapsed, America decided to build a higher tower, the Freedom Tower. Interestingly, the foundation of the Freedom Tower is a hewn stone, as the ancient harbinger of Israel. They said, "The bricks have fallen, but we're going to rebuild with hewn stones." So they put a hewn stone as the foundation of the Freedom Tower. And they said that they were going to emerge and recover, and they were going to be stronger than before. Now, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets 2001, that's when the judgments come to a nation, and when ancient Israel was meant to have the bills clean and clear before the Father. That was a day of judgment. That was just few hours before blowing the trumpets on the very Feast of Trumpets. During 2001, that is a Shemitah year, when we translate that year into the Hebrew calendar, it was the eve of Feast of Trumpets. During the eve of Feast of Trumpets 2001, there was the biggest crash in the history of Wall Street. The Dow Jones went down 650 points. 7 years later, as they were finishing the foundations for the Freedom Tower, during the same date, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets, when the nation comes, when the judgment comes to a nation, and the nation is meant to repent and have the bills clear before the Father, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets 2008, the stock market crashes 777 points, exactly 3,500 years before this date. Ancient Pharaoh Thutmose commanded the Israelites make bricks without straw, and he was killed. Now the next Shemitah is going to be a Shemitah with lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. After Father showed me this prophecy, he guided me to Book of Acts chapter 2:20. Book of Acts talks about the end of days, chapter 2:20. It says that one of the signs is that the sun was going to turn to darkness and the moon to blood. Also, the book of Revelation talks about the sun turning to darkness and the moon to blood. Also, the book of Prophet Joel talks about the sun turning to darkness and the moon to blood. In Hebraic understanding, a dark sun is talking about a total solar eclipse. When we have a total solar eclipse, we have a dark sun. And the blood moon is talking about a total lunar eclipse. When we have a total lunar eclipse, the moon is not receiving light from the sun, and the moon looks red like blood. Now, we have eclipses every single year in one part of the planet. But the symbolic aspect of prophecy is found in the book of Amos chapter 8. In the book of Amos chapter 8, it talks about a huge destruction coming to Jerusalem when everybody by Jerusalem died and the temple was destroyed. And he says that the sun will be darkened in its going forth. Also, he says that our feasts are going to be turned into lamentation. The most important celebrations in the history of Israel are the Feast of Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles. During the Feast of Passover, we have a full moon, and during the Feast of Tabernacles, we have a full moon. So during the most important celebrations in history of Israel, when the moon is meant to be full and beautiful and bright, if during those days we have a total lunar eclipse, that actually those days are the only days when we can have a total lunar eclipse. In order to have a total lunar eclipse, the moon needs to be full. We have a full moon in Passover and Sukkot. So historically, when we have lunar eclipses on the feast of Passover and Sukkot, amazing prophetic events have happened worldwide. And also, when we have 4 lunar eclipses for 2 years in a straight line, we have witnessed the Exodus of Egypt, the Exodus of Spain, and amazing events worldwide. Also, when we have lunar eclipses during Passover and Feast of Tabernacles, and we have solar eclipses on the eve of the first day of the Hebrew New Year, which is 2 weeks before Passover, and also on the eve of the Feast of Trumpets, amazing events have happened throughout history. I'm going to tell you the following events. During 1492 BC, we had lunar eclipses on Passover and Feast of Tabernacles. The children of Israel left ancient Egypt. During 1492 and 93 AD, we have 4 lunar eclipses in a straight line during Passover and Sukkot. That's the beginning of the Jewish Inquisition, and the children of Israel left Spain. During 1949, we have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot, and also during 1950. Israel becomes an independent nation after 2,000 years, and thousands of Jews leave Europe to go to Israel or to go to America. During the year 33 AD, Yeshua the Messiah is crucified. 2 hours after he was crucified, now with NASA technology, we can prove there was a lunar eclipse. Also during that very year, a group of geologists proved, studying the different layers of dirt in the Dead Sea, that there was seismic activity in Jerusalem, there was a quake. So we know in the New Testament that when Yeshua was crucified, during that week there was a major quake in Jerusalem. During the year 69 AD, we have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. Jerusalem is set on fire by the Romans. During 582 BC, we have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. Jerusalem is destroyed by Babylon. During the year 321, we have lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot, and Constantine issued the Sunday laws. You can no longer worship on Sabbath, you need to worship on Sunday. You cannot keep Passover, you have to keep Easter. You cannot keep tabernacles, you have to keep Christmas and bow down to idols. He killed and persecuted many faithful ones. During the year 1353, we had blood moons during Passover and Sukkot. At the same time, the Black Plague was devastating Europe. During the year 767, we had blood moons during Passover and Sukkot. That's when the empire was promised to Charlemagne, that was a mercenary, a warrior, that killed millions of Christians that didn't want to bow down to the Vatican. So that year of persecution happened on a blood moon in Passover and Sukkot. Interestingly, that day was 1200 years before 1967, when during the Six-Day War the Jewish people conquered Jerusalem, and for the first time after 2000 years Jerusalem was again a Jewish city. That year we had blood moons during Passover and Sukkot. During the year 1121 we had blood moons, lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot. The Jewish people are expelled from Belgium, beginning of Jewish persecution in Belgium. During 1204, lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot. Constantinople fell by the Crusaders. This was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. During 1269, we had lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot. That was the beginning of the Jewish persecution in France. During 1298, we had lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot. That was the beginning of the Jewish persecution in Germany. 5,000 Jews killed. During 1399, we had blood moons during Passover and Sukkot. That was the last outbreak of the Black Plague in Europe. So the next tetrad that is very significant is going to be in 2014 and 15, and interestingly in 2015 is a Shemitah with blood moons and solar eclipses on the eve of the Hebrew New Year and also on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. Historically, when there was a solar eclipse on the eve of Feast of Trumpets is when ancient Babylon collapsed and ancient Egypt collapsed. Interestingly, America had its biggest collapse in Wall Street during 2001 on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. 7 years later, on the eve of Feast of Trumpets, 2008, we had even a bigger crash as America was going against Israel. Millions of people lost their homes and businesses as the Dow Jones went down 777 points on the 7th Hebrew year, on the eve of the 7th month, on the eve of a high Shabbat that is always represented by the number 7. 7 years later, we're going to have a total solar eclipse on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. So when I was giving this prophecy, Father showed me the next prophecy. America also fulfills mystery of Babylon, and is also the end of days Babylon, the most powerful nation on earth. Ancient Babylon came to world power for 70 years. Jeremiah tells us that after 70 years, it says, I will punish the king of Babylon. Ancient Babylon rose to world power for 70 years. After 70 years, the king of Babylon was executed, as Jeremiah prophesied. And Babylon lost its power. Now, America, United States, comes to world power in 1945. With the victory of Second World War, with the defeat of Germany and Japan, the dollar becomes the most powerful currency on earth. Interestingly, 70 years later, it's going to be 2015 with a total solar eclipse on the eve of Feast of Trumpets and lunar eclipses on Passover and Sukkot. Interestingly, most economists predict by then, since America has been printing money and the debt of the US is surpassing $17 trillion, by then America will be completely devastated and destroyed. By then, Russia and China will have a bigger economy and a bigger army. It's very interesting. And this date is 70 years since the end of Second World War. Interestingly, Isaiah 13 gives us a prophecy when ancient Babylon collapsed. Ancient Babylon collapsed after ruling the world for 70 years. In Isaiah 13, it says that when ancient Babylon collapsed, there was a total solar eclipse. The sun was dark and the moon didn't give its light. When we read Isaiah 13, the destruction of Babylon, 13:10, It says, the sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not send out its light. The only moment we can have a total solar eclipse is at the conjunction of the moon. At the conjunction of the moon is black. This is the eve of every new moon in the Hebrew calendar, and the moon is not sending light. So ancient Babylon was destroyed with a solar eclipse at the conjunction of the moon on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. Interestingly, the same astronomical phenomenon will happen in 2015. Ancient Babylon rose to world power for 70 years. After 70 years, it was destroyed with a solar eclipse on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. America came to world power in 1945 with the victory of Second World War. 70 years later is 2015 with a total lunar eclipse on the eve of Feast of Trumpets. Interestingly, in the book of Jeremiah, it says, after 70 years, I'm going to judge the king of Babylon. Babylon rose to world power for 70 years, and after 70 years, in Jeremiah 25, 12, it says, after 70 years I will punish the king of Babylon. 70 years later, the king of Babylon was killed. It's very interesting that 2015 will be the 7th year of the current leader, the end of days Pharaoh of this nation. But what happened 40 years from this date? There is a mystery. In 1945, 40 years before this date, President Franklin Roosevelt, great friend of the King of Saudi Arabia, dealing the oil with him. The King of Saudi Arabia told him, we're going to deal with the oil, but you are not going to allow Israel to become a nation. Within a week, as judgment came on him because he refused to bless Israel, he died in his office. Interestingly, 70 years before this date is 1875. During 1875, we have the king of Babylon, the ruler of the most powerful nation on earth, dies. President Andrew Johnson dies. 70 years later, on the SHMITAH of 1945, the king of Babylon, the ruler of the most powerful nation on earth, President Roosevelt dies. 70 years later is going to be 2015, with blood moons in Passover and Sukkot, and a solar eclipse on the eve of Feast of Trumpets, and it's going to be the 7th year of Obama, 70 years since the nuclear bombing of Japan, 70 years since the end of Second World War, and 700 years since the great European famine that took place on 1315. So, after Father showed me this prophecy, he guided me to the book of Ezekiel. Let us go to Ezekiel 29. Ezekiel 29. It says, and all the inhabitants of Egypt shall know that I am Adonai, because they have been a staff of reed to the house of Israel. So Ezekiel 29 talks about the judgment on Egypt, and Ezekiel 32 talks about the destruction of Pharaoh. The ancient Pharaoh that rose in pride against Israel and betrayed Israel was executed. And this happened on Ezekiel chapter 32. And when this Pharaoh was executed and ancient Egypt lost its power and was judged, look what the prophecy says on Ezekiel 32:7. And when I shall have extinguished you, I shall cover the heavens and make the stars dark. And I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. Again, we have a dark sun and the moon not giving the light. We have a solar eclipse at the conjunction of the moon. That's the only moment when we can have a total solar eclipse. Ancient Egypt fell also on the same symbolic date. Now, after this prophecy, Father showed me the prophecy of the year of visitation. If we go to Isaiah chapter 23, Isaiah chapter 23, it says, after 70 years, I'm going to punish the city solar. Isaiah 23:17. And it shall come to pass after the end of 70 years that Adonai will visit Tyrus, which is Sor, and she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. And that's when Adonai will destroy Tyrus. So ancient Tyrus was the financial capital of the world. And it received a warning 70 years before it was destroyed, and 70 years later it was completely dashed to pieces. Now, as the judgment comes, we learn that Father brings judgment on the staff of bread, the food supply, and the economy. The ancient Nile was the breadbasket of the world. Now the Mississippi is the breadbasket of the world. Ancient Tyrus was the financial capital of the world. Now the financial capital of the world is New York. Interestingly, ancient Tyrus located in the modern country of Lebanon at the entry of the seas, at the beginning of the waters. If we go in a straight line, if we go west in a straight line from ancient Tyrus, we come to modern New York. Interestingly, in the state of New York, there is a town called Tyrus. Very prophetic symbol. Now, 70 is also a year of visitation. During 2001, United States, that began as a Christian nation and ended up being the capital of pornography and adultery and fornication and satanic Hollywood movies and New Age religions, received its visitation of warning before its destruction. During the SHMITAH of 2001, the Twin Towers collapsed. 70 years before this date is 1931. As America was finishing the Empire State as a symbol of pride and prosperity, America was hit with a terrible economical depression and natural disasters that produced an historical famine. 70 years before this date is 1861. America has another visitation for warning. During 1861, there is the American Civil War. 70 years before this date, there is another visitation. America wins the Independence War and becomes a federation. During 1791, and America establishes Washington, D.C. with an Egyptian obelisk, a very satanic Egyptian symbol of some worship. During that very year, there is economical judgment, and there are lunar eclipses during Passover and Sukkot. 70 years before this date is 1721. Europe is devastated at the end of the Great European War, and thousands of pilgrims began to immigrate to America. If we keep this unbroken chain of 70s, we come to the year 321, when Constantine issued the Sunday laws, changing the Shabbat for Sunday and persecuting millions of Christians and through Jews. Now, 2015 is going to be 70 years since 1945, which is the end of the Second World War with the nuclear bombing of Japan. During 2015, we will have all the astronomical events that happened at the fall of Babylon, that happened at the fall of ancient Egypt, and the fall of the major empires of the ancient civilizations. This will be the fall of America, and there's going to be a catalyst that will produce Third World War. Now, the next prophecy is found in Ezekiel 27. Ezekiel 27, it talks about the destruction of Tyrus. Tyrus was the ancient financial capital of the world, and it was destroyed for its wickedness. Now, New York has a town called Tyrus, and it's the new financial capital of the world, and it will be judged with fire. Interestingly, now let us go to Ezekiel 28. Ezekiel 27 talks about the destruction of Tyrus. Ezekiel 28 tells us who is the king of Tyrus. Ezekiel 28, it says, 28:2, it says, Son of Adam, say to the prince of Tyrus, thus says the sovereign Adonai, because your heart is lifted up, and you have said, I am as Adonai, I sit in the seat of the Almighty, in the middle of the waters. Yet you are man and not a mighty one, though you did set your heart as the heart of Elohim. Now, in Ezekiel 28:13, it tells us who is the king of Tyrus. It says, "You have been in Eden, the garden of Elohim. Every precious stone was your covering." In Ezekiel 28:14, it says, "You were the anointed cherub that covered. I have said you so. You were upon the set-apart mountain of Elohim. You have walked up and down in the middle of the stones of fire. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were made until iniquity was found in you." So the prince of Tyrus is the fallen angel that was in the Garden of Eden. He was an angel, a cherubim, that walked through the stones of fire and was perfect till iniquity was found in him. Who is this? No less and no other than Satan himself. So Satan was the prince of Tyrus, the financial capital of the world, as he's always behind the money. Now the richest city in the world is New York. New York also has a town called Tyrus. Could New York be ruled by Satan? Well, New York is the head of the United Nations headquarters and has approved the genocide of millions of children worldwide, has approved the slavery through the World Bank and IMF of millions of children and innocent people worldwide, is responsible for economical catastrophes worldwide. But interestingly, if we go a few hundred miles down the road, we get to Washington, D.C. The design of the city is in the form of a pentagram. Pentagram was an ancient symbol of witchcraft and Satanism, and the pentagram ends by the White House. So the nation was found on black magic principles. It's full of obelisks and pentagrams, not just in New York, but also in Washington. We also find the leaders of this nation belonging to a society called the Bohemian Grove outside of San Francisco, where every summer they gather and dress in black tunics and they worship this gigantic statue, this gigantic owl. So the leaders of this country are possessed by demons, worship Satan, as Revelation 16 says, that the unclean spirits went to the rulers of the earth. That means that all the rulers of the world are possessed by demons. After I was shown this prophecy, now Father guided me to the following harbinger. America is not just fulfilling ancient Egypt, going against Israel. It's not just fulfilling ancient Babylon, the capital of immorality. It's not just fulfilling ancient Sword, the financial capital of the world, a satanic city, New York, but it's also fulfilling Nineveh. If we go to Prophet Nahum, Prophet Nahum talks about the destruction of Nineveh. Prophet Nahum chapter 3, before Tyrus was the financial capital of the world, Nineveh was the financial capital of the world, and Prophet Nahum 3 calls her the well-favored harlot, the mistress of witchcrafts, who sells the nations through her whoredoms, and the families through her witchcrafts. It says in 3:7, "And it shall come to pass that all those who look upon you shall flee from you and say, Nineveh is laid waste." It's very interesting that Nineveh was the financial capital of the world and was completely destroyed. Interestingly, in the state of New York, we also have a town called Nineveh. We have a town called Babylon, a town called Nineveh, and we have a town called Tyrus. And very close by, a few miles down the road in New Jersey, we have a town called New Egypt. Very interesting. After I was given these prophecies, Father showed me the following harbinger. This nation is the second Germany. Back in 1945, when Germany was defeated, all the German scientists came to this nation. Interestingly, Germany was basically financed by America. There were Rockefeller bankers in New York. They financed the oil for the German planes. Henry Ford of Ford Motors, he financed the Germans. Prescott Bush, grandfather of Bush, he financed the Germans. So America was financing the Germans. At the end of the war, the Germans came to America. All the German scientists, all the experiments they did in Germany are being carried out in America. The Germans put fluoride in the water for mind control. America puts fluoride in the water for mind control. Germany built that concentration camps, the same America. Germany sprayed the ghettos with toxic gases, the same America, with chemtrails. It's the most sprayed nation on earth with chemtrails. Interestingly, at the very heart of the United States, we have the state of Colorado. At the very heart of Colorado, we have the city of Denver. By the city of Denver, we have an airport that is built in 1994 on a SHMITAH in the shape of a swastika. This airport from the sky is not just built in the shape of a swastika, but is the biggest airport in the whole world, with the biggest landing field in the whole world, and it has an underground base. How odd? At the very entrance of the airport, we have a horse. This horse is like the pale horse of the apocalypse, where 25% of the population dies. This horse has red eyes with lights on its eyes, very demonic. And you can see the veins and the bloody ribs on the side of the horse. It's like the pale horse of Revelation. Interestingly, the artist that built this gigantic horse died because the head of the horse fell on him. A prophetic sign that this satanic horse had a profound meaning in the end of days. But let us go inside the airport and see what is there. There is a mural of a Nazi soldier holding a Muslim sword. Interestingly, America is going fascist and is also becoming an Islamic country. This soldier is killing a dove that symbolizes peace. On the side of the soldier, we see thousands of dead people and cities destroyed by nuclear weapons, and we see a rainbow, which is the sign of Noah, the sign of the flood, the sign of destruction and the apocalypse. So this is a prophetic mural of Third World War. Next to this mural, there is another mural that shows us the outcome of Third World War. After Third World War, all the nations come together to make peace under the rulership of this charismatic one world leader that the scriptures describe as the son of perdition or the Antichrist. All the nations are making peace. There's a flag here that says peace, peace, and shalom in Hebrew, peace in many languages. We have the flags of Israel and Palestine coming together, making peace, and all the nations are giving their weapons, their swords, to this one world ruler that breaks them with a hammer and brings them the false peace of the Antichrist. Also, United Kingdom and Ireland and India and Pakistan make peace, and the whole world comes under this one world ruler. The following mural tells us how they will achieve that peace. In order to achieve that peace, you need to have a one world religion. So we have this mural of all civilizations coming together, and there is a Native American doing a pagan ceremony by a flower. All civilizations and all New Age philosophies and all religions coming together. In order to make a one world religion, they need to get rid of certain people. And we see this other mural. The cities are on fire in the background, a nuclear blast, and here we have also a Mexican girl holding the Mayan tablets, and we have a Native American girl coming together, all the pagan religions coming together, and we have three people dead on a coffin. A black lady, a Native American, and a Christian Jewish girl. Interestingly, these are the three people that the Nazis wanted to eliminate. The blacks, Native Americans, or any other ethnic group that was not German, and the Jews or the true Christians. The next mural shows in detail the people that they want to eliminate. And we see a coffin with a little girl that has a cross in her chest. She's Christian, but also on the right side she has an hexagram. And this is the same hexagram that the Jewish people were forced to wear during Second World War in Germany. So she is like a Jewish Christian girl. And this is the people they want to destroy to make a one world religion. So that's why the prophecies talk about flee Babylon before it's destroyed, flee Babylon before it's destroyed, flee Babylon before it's destroyed. Now after this, Father guided me to the next monument in this country, which are the Georgia Guidestones. This is a country erected in the 1980s in the state of Georgia. It has the 10 Commandments of the Beast. It says to reduce the world population below 500 million. This is the plan of the Antichrist, so he can rule the world. Since he's not the Almighty, he needs the population down so he can rule it. To bring down the population to 500 million means to kill 95% of the inhabitants. Also, these stones talk about having a one world religion, a one world language, and a one world court, all the nations together. To achieve this goal, they want to destroy the population through cancer and through chemtrails. US is the most sprayed nation on earth. These are chemtrails. When the planes used to fly back in the 90s, they used to leave a contrail, a little column of smoke that would disappear after 5 seconds. Now, the skies are sprayed with chemtrails, toxic aluminum gas that destroys the organic crops, and only Monsanto transgenic crops can survive. Also destroys people with cancers and Alzheimer's. Also, America, what the scriptures talk about the exodus from this nation, because they want to kill everybody with cancer. America is the #1 producer in the world of genetically modified crops, Monsanto. The Monsanto family is established by the DuPont family. The DuPont family in Germany established IG Farben. IG Farben was the company that was in charge of producing all the chemical gases that the Germans used to liquidate the Jewish people. The same family came to America and founded Monsanto, the very company that is producing 80 or 90% of the world's transgenic crops and is killing millions and millions with cancer and other diseases every single year. So after this, Father showed me another picture, Jeremiah 6, and in Ezekiel talks about to flee the north and calamity comes from the north. When I was reading this verse, Father showed me that in the northern hemisphere of the world, we have 99% of the nuclear weapons, 99% of the nuclear reactors, 99% of the chemtrails and magnetic radiation and transgenic crops, and 95% of the Muslim population. And the most sophisticated armies of the world are in the northern hemisphere. So most of the destruction in the northern hemisphere is going to happen. Most of the destruction of Armageddon and Third World War is going to happen in the northern hemisphere. So his people need to go south of the equator, not to Australia or New Zealand, which are countries run by United Kingdom. After this, Father showed me that as the blood moons, lunar eclipses are coming to America, also this is coming. Under the new healthcare reform, every single citizen will be commanded to have an implanted microchip. Without it, you won't be able to go to any hospital. Eventually, it's going to be used to buy and sell, as the book of Revelation says. With a microchip, they can implant through high and low frequencies thoughts in your mind, and you become a puppet of the system. Now, there are many brothers trying to set up places of safety within this country. The only problem is that with Agenda 21, once the Civil War is over and once Third World War devastates most of the country, once the country is destroyed, most likely by nuclear weapons, the country will be divided in Agenda 21. Every single piece of land in red, green, or yellow is going to be controlled and regulated and confiscated. People are going to live in the black spots, urban areas like LA and San Francisco, Chicago, New York, New Jersey, and Boston. So all the farmland is going to be confiscated, and this place has the most sophisticated technology and drones and scanners and radars to take the land away from its citizens. Staying here only means destruction and only means to die with the civil war, with nuclear disasters, with natural disasters, and with cancer. The prophecies of Jeremiah 50 and 51 tell us to flee Babylon, flee Babylon, flee Babylon, flee Babylon. The Exodus is written in the sky. Every time in history we have 4 blood moons, there has been an Exodus. We had blood moons during 1492 BC, the Exodus out of Egypt. During 1492 AD, we had the blood moons. That year and the following year, that was the Exodus out of Spain. During 1949 and 50, we had blood moons. That was the Exodus out of Europe. Now it's coming again. And this time is the Exodus out of this nation. Father is taking his people to the southern hemisphere, to the wilderness, to build a nation of priests. Interestingly, the year 6000 is not very far from 2050. When we analyze all the chronology of the Shemitah years, when Yeshua began his ministry, he quoted Isaiah 61 that says, "The Spirit of Adonai is upon me. He has anointed me to preach the news of salvation to the poor, the brokenhearted, to release the captives, and to proclaim the year of the favor of Adonai." This year was a jubilee. According to the New Testament, Yeshua is beginning his ministry after John the Baptist, and John the Baptist begins his ministry on the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar Augustus. That, proven in archaeology, was the year 29. So, using the genealogy given in the Hebrew Scriptures and all the archaeological evidence, the year 6000 cannot be before the year 2025 or after the year 2035. Interestingly, on 2015, a few years before the coming of the great day of Yeshua, we have blood moons, Tetrad, meeting a Shemitah, and this is when the tribulation will start. Global financial chaos, Third World War, after that the building of the third temple, after that the 2 witnesses prophesied for 3 years and a half, after that the Antichrist rules the world for 3 years and a half, after that Yeshua comes to destroy the Antichrist and those that have the mark of the beast, and he comes to rule this world for 1,000 years. The millennium is going to be from the year 6000 to the year 7000. The year 6000 is just around the corner. So this is the season when he's calling his people to the wilderness to save them and to purify them and to refine them so they can truly become a nation of priests and be ready to receive the great Messiah Yeshua that is coming on the clouds. On 2014, worldwide the brothers need to be prepared with food supply, water. They need to be outside of America, outside of Israel. Jeremiah 24 talks about the exodus from Israel. Isaiah 4, to Israel will come only the Third World War and then the Antichrist. And even Yeshua talks about escaping Jerusalem. And his people need to flee the north. The most affected nations by nuclear disasters and by the mark of the beast will be North America, Europe, Middle East, Russia, China, and Japan. Where also in this region, the northern hemisphere, 95% of the Muslim population is located. So 2014 is the year of preparation. This is the second Exodus. Also, ancient Israel went to Egypt. When Joseph was 39 years old, his brothers came. 240 years later, they left Egypt, which is 430 years from the birth of Isaac. When the 10 tribes were exiled to Persia, 240 years later, they came out of Persia under Ezra and Nehemiah, a remnant of these 10 tribes. Now, during 1775 begins the independence movement. 240 years later is 2015 with blood moons and Passover as disaster is coming and nuclear holocaust is coming and the mark of the beast is coming to America. This is the second Exodus. Every time we have 4 blood moons in a straight line, there has been an Exodus. We will have this astronomical event in 2014 and 15. So 2014 is the year of preparation to be out of America and out of Israel and out of the northern hemisphere, and to have places in the wilderness far from cities, with water, with supplies. And it is the time to build the priesthood. That Father says that He was going to take us in the wilderness to build the priesthood. Shalom and many blessings. Fast and pray about this message, for the end of days is at hand. Shalom and blessings to all of you. Shalom. In the name of Yeshua. Amen.